obviously we paid cash for the house.
Mm.
I looked over at my wife and I said, right in front of this guy, right at his desk, I said, see, I told you, this guy, by his inability to answer my question, is giving you all the information you need as to how much of a scam this really is.
Mm-hmm.
And she looked over at me and she said, thank you for opening my eyes.
Yeah.
And we had one of the most interesting conversations in the car on the way home that afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Well,
this is how mind control plays into this.
Yeah.
She really believed, because everyone else has one, I have to have one too.
Yeah, exactly. And what you bring up there is also a very good point, because in so many cases you can talk about it and you can try to, with theory, so to speak, explain to people what is going on. But the best way, I think, is what you just described. Is it's something practical, something that you actually do as an kind of an example. Look at this, or look what the consequence of this is, or whatever, or just in a way in the day-to-day life kind of things that you come across or that you have to do or whatever. That has to be that is the learning process, and that has to be the examples that you bring up to people. And I think that's a brilliant way to do it, Kent. That really helps to wake up people, that you show that you can do things differently, or whatever it might be. It's practical, and I think it's the best way.
Yes, the real world example is extremely important, because it does show people that there are real people involved in certain situations from which they can learn quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in fact, what ended up happening with this situation was I had been visited by one of my friends who had come to my house. This was a friend that I had known from high school, and this was 3 years after we bought the house. He comes over, and we got to talking about home mortgages, and I asked him if he truly understood what he would ultimately pay for his house.
Mm.
As we had been talking about this, he, told me that he knew, because the banker had told him that he paid 55,000 American dollars for this house. And I had said to him, now, what was your interest rate for this? And he had bought his house a few years before mine, so his interest rate was higher than mine.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was 10%. And this was almost double of the one I was quoted at the meeting with the mortgage broker.
Mm-hmm.
And I answered my friend, I said, I can tell you for a fact that you did not pay $55,000 for your house. By the time you're finished paying for this house, you will have paid approximately $175,000.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you can figure it out for yourself. Just go home after you're done visiting me today. Go to your desk drawer, pull out your mortgage coupon book, take the amount of your monthly payment, and multiply that figure by 360, because that's the number of months in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So he leaves my house. About an hour later, I get this phone call. Pick up the phone, and my friend is on the phone screaming at me, extremely upset. and he proceeded to blame me
What?
for showing him something that he didn't want to see.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, exactly. Oh.
So here was an attempt on my part to educate somebody whom I had been friends with for 25, 30 years. And this was my result for my troubles, to be screamed at, accused of, showing him the nasty, evil, awful truth.
Yeah, yeah. Well, exactly. They're in the system. They're dependent on the system, as they so brilliantly say in the Matrix movie, that people will even fight to protect the system that actually is enslaving them. I mean, they're potentially in a happy place, and they might not want to be quote unquote unplugged from that. And that kind of get me back to the idea that I was talking about earlier, that even though that it is a rotten system, it necessarily doesn't mean that everyone actually wants to wake up from it. And again, I mean, is it our responsibility then to actually force people into this, or give them this information? In the end, of course, I think that this is all for the better. But as you say, at least the people that are like you in this instance, that was highlighting this information to someone, we shouldn't, I guess, expect all the time to be, get a warm welcome when we do this, so to speak. Actually, this is a kind of a natural reaction. I think a lot of people do get upset because they realize that they've been had,
Yeah, exactly. And, it's very difficult to try to judge who in your life is approachable on these issues, and
sure,
who you must stay away from, because they're going to freak out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've had a lot of varied responses to what I'm doing, although now, at this point in time, there are very, very few negative responses that I'm getting anymore.
Sure.
This was more like 6-7 years ago that this type of thing was happening. Now I have such a track record that I've developed over the past 2.5, 3 years of being online and publishing and doing interviews and so forth, where I've actually been able to prove to people that, I do know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
They're a little more agreeable to hear what I have to say.
Sure, exactly. And again, I think you have to learn to kind of, you have to also target the people that are ready to listen, because there's no reason or no, idea to, again, kind of pressure this upon people in that sense. I think that the wake-up process, so to speak, is something that it starts from within everybody. It's not some external thing happening. Okay, in some instances that might be the case, but yet again, I think that is only because they themselves, in some part of themselves, were kind of waiting for some kind of trigger to begin to open up their eyes or whatever. But again, I think that this is internal, and as soon as people begin asking you the questions, or they're ready to listen or whatever, then it's a good time. But otherwise, I think, as you say, it can actually end up hurting people. Who knows?
Exactly. In fact, the way that this has gone for me is it hasn't been all roses and candy here. All of this discovery of truth and digging into the matrix to figure out how to combat this. And because of that, I've had times when I was, spitting mad and very angry,
sure,
feeling very taken, so to speak.
Sure.
And I try to explain to people that this is part of the game here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not going to be delivered to you on a bed of roses.
Exactly.
You're going to be, you know, oh, this is lovely. Thank you for sharing this with me.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have some trials and tribulations.
Oh, yeah.
It's just all a part of the whole process.
Mm. It is, definitely.
The key is getting beyond all that and reaching for the data beyond these trouble spots where you are uncomfortable, because that's when you start to really dip into the real interesting information.
Exactly. Well, again, it's kind of an idea, again, that I've been talking about before, but there are so many kind of, all this information is kind of, it's on the first level, so to speak, and there are so many, you know, endlessly basically levels above this, and the first initial process, as you say, can be very, very painful, the awakening experience, and realizing that you know, the world is not what you thought it was and all of that, but soon, I think it's an important process is to, okay, wake up from that and then move on, you know, and continue searching and then continue, you know, going into other areas. There's so much more out there, and I think the only people that are potentially kind of in a very difficult place are the one who kind of stays put, so to speak, and don't you know, develop themselves or develop and go into further, you know, information, either if it's into you know, the spiritual aspects of you know, humanity or whatever. There's, again, it's an endless, you know, endless universe out there of you know, potential things that are happening, and the purpose for us being on this planet and so forth. And I'm very, very glad that you mentioned this, because I see that as a kind of a necessary next step in that process. And along this way, of course, there are people who, you know, brilliantly do their research that helps us along in this process, that kind of shows us the different things of the manipulation, of the conspiracy, and then there's people on the next level that talk about the spirituality of man and so forth. And that ultimately, in the end of the day, that's how I kind of see all of this. It's a journey of awakening, and the journey is, you know, endless, and it's continuous. You know, I don't know what you think about that, Kent, but I guess you are inclined towards that kind of idea too. Am I right?
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, I look at this as eternal student type of a situation for myself. You know, I'm always learning something new. I'm always incorporating new concepts into old ideas. There's never any one subject that's finished at one particular time.
Yeah.
You know, there's always something that you can add to no matter what it is you're talking about. For instance, you know, there's so much that has come to light about Hillary Clinton, for instance, in the past year, since we did that talk about her presidency coming up next year.
Yeah.
And there's been some talk about, you know, her embezzling some money to fatten up her campaign coffers and things like this, which are not entirely that surprising to me.
Yeah.
Because it just is an extension of old behavior on her part and on the part of her husband. So, you know, that subject is open, and it's going to continue to have data added to it as we go forward, right up to Election Day and beyond, actually.
Absolutely, definitely, and I'm glad you brought that up, because if we're beginning to round things up here for today, Kent, I did want to kind of end and spend the last few minutes on this